They told me marrying him would be social suicide, that I was choosing a life of dirt and mediocrity. On my wedding day, my family's side of the aisle was completely empty. They were too ashamed to be seen with the man I loved. But they had no idea. The plumber they called a disgrace was hiding a secret that would shatter their perfect world into a million pieces. By this time tomorrow, they'd be on national television, watching him. The air in the garden was thick with the scent of jasmine and magnolia, a perfume I had chosen myself, now soured by the acid taste of abandonment. The string quartet began the opening notes of Canon in D, a melody I had dreamed of walking to since I was a little girl. My hands shook so violently, the wild orchids in my bouquet trembled, petals drifting to the stone path like fallen hopes. This was it, the moment. I stepped out from behind the ivy-covered trellis, my white silk gown whispering against the grass. I looked down the aisle, and the sight nearly drove me to my knees. On the right, the groom's side, every chair was filled. About 20 people, mostly Marcus's friends. They were a mix, some in simple suits, others in attire that whispered of quiet affluence. Their faces were warm, expectant. But the left side, my side, it was a ghost town, a chilling sea of empty white folding chairs. Row after row of vacant seats stared back, a gaping, silent scream. 40 invitations, 40 family members, not a single soul. The music faltered. A soft, collective murmur of pity rose from Marcus's guests. The silence from my side was a physical force, pushing the air from my lungs. I stood frozen, one foot hovering over the first stone, utterly alone. Then, a vibration against my hip, my phone tucked away for emergencies. A sick, cold dread pooled in my stomach. I shouldn't look. I should walk. But some desperate, masochistic part of me had to know. I pulled it out, my fingers fumbling. A text notification glowed on the screen. Mother. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. No explanation of a car crash, a sudden illness, just cold, crisp words that iced my veins. Nia, I am sorry, but I cannot lower myself to be seen sitting in a backyard with a blue-collar crowd. It would be social suicide. Your father and I are at the yacht party with Brad and Kesha. We have an image to maintain. Good luck with your life of mediocrity. Mediocrity? Social suicide? The words blurred as hot tears welled. A choked sob escaped me, ugly and raw in the quiet garden. The quartet stopped playing. All eyes were on me, a spectacle of humiliation, just as my mother intended. I wanted to dissolve, to let the earth swallow me whole. How could they? Today of all days? Then I saw him, Marcus. He wasn't waiting at the altar. He was already moving, striding down the aisle with a purpose that parted the air. He ignored tradition, the gasped whispers. He reached me, his eyes not on the emptiness, but solely on my face. He took the phone from my numb fingers, glanced at the screen, and a storm cloud passed behind his eyes before he tucked it into his pocket. His hands, warm and rough from honest work, enveloped mine. "They don't deserve you, Nia," he whispered, his voice a low, fierce anchor in my spinning world. "Look at me. They are small people chasing small things, but I am here. I am not going anywhere. Today is about us, just us. Don't let them steal this." I looked into his dark, steady gaze and saw a fortress where I had only known fault lines. I nodded, a shuddering breath rattling through me. "I'm ready." He didn't return to the altar. He tucked my hand into the crook of his arm and walked me down the aisle himself, filling the devastating space my father had vacated. As we passed the rows of empty chairs, a new feeling began to burn through the grief, a sharp, clean blade of anger. They thought that absence would break me.
They were wrong. The ceremony was a blur of tears and defiant vows. Marcus slid a simple gold band on my finger. I didn't know then it was vintage platinum, the diamond a rare stone from a private auction. I didn't know a lot of things. As we cased, husband and wife, a strange moment pierced my haze. One of Marcus's guests, a distinguished older man in a suit that cost more than my car, leaned to his companion. "It is him," he murmured, too low for most to hear. "The photo in the journal was grainy, but I'd swear it. What's he doing here?" The comment was a pebble dropped into the deep well of my shock, creating ripples I was too overwhelmed to follow. But to understand the depth of the cut, the sheer scale of the betrayal that led to this empty garden, you have to go back, 6 months back, to the dinner that started the war. The air in my parents' mansion 6 months ago was just as thick, but with the cloying scent of gardenias and unspoken judgments. I had begged Marcus to wear his best suit, to play a part for just one night. He'd refused. "They'll love me or they won't, Nia, but it'll be for me." He came straight from a job site, a massive municipal water treatment facility that was failing. His heavy-duty coveralls were clean but unmistakable, his boots caked with dried clay, a smudge of grease on his capable hand. To me, he looked like integrity. To my parents, he looked like the help who'd taken a wrong turn. My father, Desmond Vance, stood in the marble foyer, a crystal tumbler of cognac in hand. He didn't extend his own. He looked at Marcus's offered hand as if it held a contagious disease. "Patrice," he called over his shoulder, voice dripping with disdain, "remind me to have the maid sanitize the entryway tomorrow. It smells of manual labor." The dinner was a meticulously staged execution. My mother, Patrice, inquired if Marcus knew how to read a wine list. My sister, Kesha, preened beside her fiancé, Brad, a shark smile in Wall Street Spectre. Brad waited until the filet mignon was served to strike. "So, Marcus, Nia tells us you deal with pipes. The guest toilet on the second floor has been acting up. Since you're already dressed for it, why not take a look after dessert? I'll throw in a 50 for your trouble." Kesha tittered. My mother covered a smile. My father nodded, approving of the sport. I saw red, my chair scraping back. But Marcus laid a calm hand on my arm. He set down his fork and looked at Brad, not with anger, but with the cool focus of a scientist observing a lesser organism. "Actually, Brad," his voice was quiet yet cleaving the room, "based on this home's age and the terrain slope, your issue is likely a ventilation deficit in the main stack, causing a vacuum lock. Throwing $50 at a negative pressure differential won't fix it, but I can recommend a specialist. He charges $200 an hour to solve problems money can't hide."
The table fell silent. Brad's smirk melted into confusion. My mother's face purpled. "How dare you?" she hissed. "You come in here smelling of grease and dare to lecture a finance executive? You have no idea of your place." "Get out," my father commanded, finger quivering toward the door. "Nia, if you leave with him, do not come back until you've found someone worthy of this family." Marcus stood, pulling out my chair with a grace that seemed to mock their opulence. "We're leaving. And don't worry, I wouldn't want to stay in a house where the plumbing is broken and the people are even more so." We left them sputtering in their cathedral of false values. In the quiet of his pickup truck, I trembled with rage and shame. Marcus just held me. "It's you and me," he said simply, and I knew, with a certainty that terrified and thrilled me, that I had chosen right. But I had no idea that the man who could diagnose a plumbing flaw from across a dinner table was sitting on a secret that would one day detonate their world. The campaign of attrition began in earnest. When I announced our wedding date in my father's oak-paneled study, he looked at me with a disappointment more crushing than fury. "If you marry this man, you are no longer a daughter of this house," he said, his voice chillingly final. I will not spend a dime on that trash wedding. Do not expect a check, a blessing, or our presence. You are choosing mediocrity. You are dead to me." The financial reality was stark. My savings were tied up in my fledgling landscape architecture firm. Planning a wedding seemed impossible. When Marcus offered to pay, I refused fiercely. "I won't let you drain your savings because my father's a tyrant. We'll do something small. Ours." He looked at me with an odd expression, relief mixed with a deep, unreadable sadness. "You really mean that, don't you?" he whispered. I didn't understand. I thought he was moved by my willingness to struggle. I didn't know he was a man hiding a mountain of wealth, testing to see if I'd love the man in the valley. We found a humble venue, Willow Creek Gardens. I made the mistake of posting a single hopeful picture. Keisha saw it, my mother saw it, a phone call was made, our reservation was canceled due to a scheduling conflict. The manager, voice thick with apology, confessed the truth. "Your mother called the owner, Miss Vance. She can't afford to lose your family's business." I was shattered. That night, Marcus made a call about a part. 20 minutes later, the venue manager called back, breathless. Not only was our date reinstated, but we'd been upgraded to the Grand Pavilion, free of charge. A miracle, I thought. A stroke of cosmic luck. I didn't know it was a wire transfer from a Cayman Islands holding company Marcus controlled. He hadn't just saved our date, he'd bought the venue. The sabotage continued. Dress shopping became a public humiliation when my mother and Keisha coincidentally arrived, getting the sales clerk to imply I couldn't afford the lace gown I loved. Marcus arrived still in his work clothes and paid with a heavy black metal card that made the clerk blanch, a Centurion card. My mother scoffed, whispering to Keisha about irresponsible debt. They saw a plumber maxing out credit. They didn't see a king. The final, brutal blow was the guest list. My mother didn't just boycott, she orchestrated a mass exodus. She called every aunt, uncle, and cousin. The ultimatum was clear: attend Nia's backyard disaster and be permanently uninvited from Keisha's extravagant, celebrity-studded winning in Italy. One by one, the regret texts trickled in, flimsy, insulting lies about sudden allergies and urgent pantry reorganization. My family chose the party over me. They made their calculation, and I was found wanting. The night before the wedding, I made one last foolish pilgrimage to my parents' estate. I found them toasting Keisha's floral arrangements. "Please," I whispered, the word tasting of ash, "just walk me down the aisle. Don't let me stand there alone." My father picked up the hand-calligraphied invitation I'd brought and dropped it into the trash can. "You chose your path," he said, his eyes stone. "As far as I'm concerned, I have only one daughter. Her name is Keisha. To me, you are dead." I walked out of that house, that life, for the last time. The grief was a living thing, clawing at my throat. But as I drove away, a strange clarity emerged. They had cut the last tether. I was free. The morning after the wedding, my parents awoke on the estate terrace, nursing yacht party hangovers and savoring their own righteousness. "A mercy we didn't go," Keisha drawled, scrolling her phone. "Not a single photo posted. Must have been tragic." "She made her bed," my mother sighed, sipping her coffee. "One can only hope she learns her lesson when the bills come due." In the background, the large outdoor television was tuned to a national news channel. A breaking news graphic flashed, accompanied by an urgent chime. The anchor leaned forward, her voice charged. "We have an exclusive this morning. The elusive founder of HydroFlow Tech, the revolutionary water purification startup, is stepping out of the shadows after signing a historic $800 million federal contract. For the first time, we can reveal the man behind the mystery." My father glanced up, interest piqued. "HydroFlow? I tried to get a meeting with their board. Ghost operation." The camera panned to the guest chair. A man in a flawlessly tailored Tom Ford suit sat with relaxed authority. He was handsome, powerful, and utterly familiar. "Please welcome the CEO of HydroFlow Tech, Mr. Marcus King." My mother's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, exploding on the patio stone. No one moved to clean it. They just stared. On screen, my husband smiled. I chose to come forward today because yesterday was the most important day of my life. I married my best friend, Nia. The anchor prompted him. Tell us about her. She's a landscape architect with a brilliant eye, but more importantly, she's the only person who saw me when I had nothing to show but calloused hands and a dream. I wore coveralls. I looked like a blue-collar worker because I believe in the dignity of labor. Her family did not. My father's face turned the color of old putty. Marcus continued, his gaze steady on the camera. They saw a plumber. They called me a disgrace. They told Nia marrying me was social suicide. Yesterday at our wedding, her side of the aisle was empty. They left their daughter to walk alone. Keisha made a small whimpering sound. But they made a mistake, he said, a hint of steel entering his tone. They thought they were rejecting a laborer. They didn't know they were rejecting the man who just bought the company their mortgages are held by. Nia is the only one who passed the test. She loved me for me. Now she shares everything I've built. He leaned forward, a final, devastating smile touching his lips. I'd like to thank my in-laws, Desmond and Patrice Vance, for not attending. Your absence was the greatest gift you could have given us. It made our day perfect.
The broadcast cut to a commercial. The silence on the terrace was absolute, broken only by the first ring of my mother's phone, then my father's, then Kesha's. A cacophony of notifications, a digital avalanche of social and professional ruin. The Vance family was no longer elite. They were a punchline. We returned from a secret honeymoon, a private island Marcus owned, to a world turned upside down. My phone, once silent, now held 129 missed calls and hundreds of messages. The texts from my mother were masterpieces of revisionist history. A terrible The broadcast cut to a commercial. The silence on the terrace was absolute, broken only by the first ring of my mother's phone, then my father's, then Kesha's. A cacophony of notifications, a digital avalanche of social and professional ruin. The Vance family was no longer elite. They were a punchline. We returned from a secret honeymoon, a private island Marcus owned, to a world turned upside down. My phone, once silent, now held 129 missed calls and hundreds of messages. The texts from my mother were masterpieces of revisionist history. A terrible misunderstanding. We were only testing your love. Come home, baby. Brad's messages begged for a business meeting. Kesha's veered between apology and accusation, blaming me for her lost sponsorships. Marcus watched me read them, his expression unreadable. "You're drowning," he said, "and they think you're the only life raft." "I want to see them," I heard myself say. "One last time. I want them to see me, not the invisible daughter, Mrs. King." He nodded. Then they come to us. The meeting was set in the executive conference room at Hydroflow's Atlanta headquarters, a glass palace in the sky. I watched on a security feed as my family was forced to surrender their belongings, wear visitor badges, and be escorted like common petitioners. The small indignities were a prelude. We let them stew for 10 minutes in the sterile, powerful silence of the room. Then we entered. I wore a cream power suit. Marcus wore the aura of absolute control. He didn't greet them. He simply said, "You have 30 minutes. Talk." Their performance was pitiful. My mother's fake tears, my father's stiff posture, Brad's slimy business pitch. Marcus let them finish. Then he slid a blue folder across the table to Brad. "I looked into your portfolio, Brad. The Sterling Capital Fund is a Ponzi scheme. You've been running it for 3 years. You even stole from your future in-laws." He looked at my ashen father. "That $5 million you liquidated, Desmond, the second mortgage, it's gone.
He used it to pay off earlier marks. The room erupted in chaos. Kesha's scream, my mother's wail, Brad's sputtering denials. It was cut short by the entrance of federal agents who read Brad his rights and led him away in handcuffs. In the stunned silence that followed, Marcus delivered the coup de grace. The Sapphire Hills Country Club, your social anchor for 30 years. I bought it this morning. My first act as owner was to revoke the memberships of anyone who abandons their children or enables fraud. You are banned, effective immediately. It was the final, absolute stripping of their identity, broke, socially exiled, and utterly hollow. My mother lunged across the table, her composure shattered. "Naya, please, we're your parents. We love you. Help us." I stood. I looked at them, the sources of a lifetime of tiny cuts and one massive mortal wound. I felt nothing but a vast, quiet emptiness. "You're only sorry because you lost," I said, my voice echoing in the space. "If Marcus were still just a man in work boots, you'd still be laughing on that yacht. I don't need your apologies. I don't need your money. I have a family." I took Marcus's hand. "This is my family. You are just people I used to know." I pressed the intercom. "Security, these guests are trespassing. Please escort them out." As they were led away, my father shrunken, my mother weeping, Kesha broken, Marcus and I turned to the floor-to-ceiling window. We watched from our dizzying height as 3 small, forlorn figures were deposited onto the busy sidewalk below. They had no car, no club, no home that wasn't forfeit, no reputation left. They stood there, exposed, with nothing but the consequences they had so meticulously crafted. Marcus squeezed my hand. The weight I had carried for 28 years, the weight of their conditional love and endless judgment, was simply gone. Lifted away, not by revenge, but by the sheer, staggering force of truth. "Let's go home," I said. He smiled, the warm, genuine smile that had first drawn me in, that had never been about pipes or profits, but about promise. Let's go home. The sun was bright over the city, a city we would now help shape. Behind us, in the polished glass, our reflection was clear. 2 people, side by side, facing a future they had built together from the broken pieces of the past. The empty chairs were far behind us now. Ahead, every seat at our table would be filled with those who chose love, who chose loyalty, who chose us. And that was more than enough. It was everything. The silence in the penthouse was profound, not the heavy, judgmental quiet of my Karen's mansion, but a deep, breathable peace. The panoramic windows of the Four Seasons suite framed the Atlanta skyline like a living painting, lights beginning to twinkle against the indigo dusk. I stood there, my forehead resting against the cool glass, the ghost of my family's desperate faces still imprinted behind my eyes. Marcus came up behind me, his arms encircling my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. We watched the city pulse below, a world away from the crumbling sidewalk where my past now stood. "You okay?" he murmured into my hair. I turned in his arms, searching his face, the face that had been called common, that had been sneered at across a dinner table, that was now one of the most recognizable in the world of tech and philanthropy. "I feel light," I said, the truth of it surprising me, like I've been carrying a boulder my whole life and someone just vaporized it. He kissed my temple. "It wasn't vaporized. You finally set it down." He was right. The confrontation wasn't about winning. It had been about finally, definitively closing a door. The lock had clicked from our side. "What happens now?" I asked, not with fear, but with a burgeoning sense of possibility that was almost dizzying. "Now," he said, leading me to the plush sofa, "we build, not just the company, our life. No more hiding, no more secret apartments or aliases. I have a board meeting tomorrow. I want you there, not as a guest, as a partner.
HydroFlow's new community outreach and sustainable design division needs a director. The board just doesn't know it yet. I blinked. Marcus, I'm a landscape architect. I design gardens. You design systems, he corrected, his eyes alight. Ecosystems that balance beauty and function. That's what HydroFlow does, but on a macro scale, water systems for cities. I want you to integrate green spaces, urban gardens, community-centric design into every project. Make our technology beautiful, Naya. Make it human. He grinned, a boyish, excited grin I rarely saw. We'll call it the Root and River Initiative. Your brain, my resources. The idea unfurled inside me like one of my own seedlings finally reaching the sun. It wasn't a job offer. It was a fusion of our soul's work, my dream on a scale I'd never dared imagine. Yes, I breathed, 1,000 times yes. The next morning, I walked into the HydroFlow boardroom on Marcus's arm, but not in his shadow. I wore another suit, emerald green this time, a color of growth and audacity. The room, full of mostly older, serious-faced men and a few sharp-eyed women, fell silent. The news had broken. They knew who I was, both the scorned daughter and the woman who had stood by their enigmatic CEO.
Marcus didn't sit at the head of the table. He pulled out the chair next to it for me, then stood at the helm. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his CEO voice in full force, assured, visionary, leaving no room for doubt. "You've read the headlines. The speculation ends today. This is my wife, Naya King. For the past 6 months, while you've been puzzling over my eccentric, hands-on approach at job sites, she has been the one constant in my life. She is also one of the most gifted design minds I've ever encountered." He laid out the Root and River Initiative. He spoke of symbiotic infrastructure, of cities where water purification centers were also public parks, where filtration plants were wrapped in living walls and crowned with community gardens. He painted the future I'd sketched in my humble notebooks, but on a canvas as vast as the country itself. I stood to present my portfolio. My hands were steady. I spoke of soil, of runoff, of psychological well-being, of turning concrete jungles back into habitats. I showed them the designs for my own scrappy, aborted wedding garden. "This was built on a shoestring, with heart," I said. "Imagine what we can do with purpose and scale." The board was skeptical at first. They saw profit margins, liability, unproven concepts. But Marcus fielded their financial and logistical concerns with razor-sharp precision, while I answered the philosophical and aesthetic ones. We were a perfect circuit. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, the vote was unanimous. The Root and River Division was born, with me at its head. As we left the boardroom, Marcus's assistant, a whip-smart woman named Chloe, approached, her tablet in hand. "Mr. King, Mrs. King, the requests are piling up. Media, charities, talk shows. Forbes wants a joint cover. Also," she hesitated slightly, "your mother has called the main switchboard 17 times this morning. She's insisting it's a family emergency." Marcus looked at me. The decision was mine. "Block the number," I said, my voice calm. "And please, Chloe, filter all requests related to my biological family through legal. We have no comment." "Understood," Chloe nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. Our new life took shape with breathtaking speed. We moved out of the hotel and into a modern, airy home in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. Not a gated compound of old money, but a community of innovators and artists. My first project for Root and River was a revitalization plan for the very municipal water facility where Marcus had been working the night of the fateful dinner. It would become the Willow Creek Water Hub, featuring a public education center, a botanical garden showcasing native, water-wise plants, and a community farm on its roof. The media dubbed us the power couple redefining Atlanta. Our story, the plumber and the overlooked daughter, was a modern fairy tale with a bite.
It was a narrative of comeuppance that resonated deeply. We used the spotlight carefully, granting interviews only to discuss our work, steering every conversation back to water security and green urbanism. Meanwhile, the fallout for the Vance family was swift and merciless. Dante, my sympathetic cousin, became my reluctant informant. Brad's arrest had triggered a cascade of investigations. My father's law firm, facing a loss of confidence from major clients who found the association embarrassing, asked him to take an indefinite leave of absence. The foreclosure notice on the family estate was imminent. My mother, stripped of her club memberships and her social capital, became a ghost in the very circles she once ruled. Keisha's influencer career evaporated. Brands couldn't distance themselves fast enough. She was now a meme, a cautionary tale of arrogance. They were not just broke, they were pariahs. A rainy afternoon, about a month after the board meeting, I was in my new home office sketching designs for a rainwater catchment system integrated into a public library when the doorbell rang. Our house manager, a discreet older gentleman named Walter, appeared at my door. "Mrs. King," he said, his tone neutral, "there's a Ms. Keisha Vance at the gate. She's alone, and she's insistent." I put down my pencil. I hadn't spoken to her since the conference room. A part of me, the little sister part, twisted with a reflexive pang. But the woman I was now, Mrs. King, director of Root and River, felt only a wary stillness. "Let her in, Walter. Show her to the sunroom. I'll be there in a moment." I didn't change. I went as I was, in jeans and a sweatshirt, my hair in a messy bun, charcoal smudges on my fingers. This was my home. She was the visitor. Keisha looked diminished. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by off-the-rack jeans and a thin jacket. Her hair was pulled back, her face free of its usual layers of makeup, revealing the tired, fearful woman underneath. She stood in the middle of the bright, plant-filled sunroom, looking utterly lost. "Naya," she said, her voice raspy. No sarcasm, no superiority. "Keisha." She wrung her hands, a nervous habit I'd never seen in her. I don't know where else to go." "Sit," I said, gesturing to a chair. I took the one opposite. She sat on the edge, as if ready to flee. "Mom's not well. She just sits in the dark. Dad's trying to fight the foreclosure, but the legal fees. Brad's taken everything. The house is gone next week." She took a shivering breath, her eyes finally meeting mine. They were full of a raw, unvarnished shame. "I was awful to you. I was a monster. I parroted every horrible thing they said because I was so terrified of ending up on the outside. And now, look." I didn't offer comfort. I waited. "I'm not asking for money," she said quickly, though the unspoken plea hung in the air. I'm begging for a job. Anything. I'll answer phones, I'll clean offices. I need to help them. They're my parents, too, and they're broken." A single tear tracked through the dust on her cheek. It looked real. This was the test. Not for her, but for me. The path of vengeance was clear. Show her the door. The path of the doormat was also clear. Open my arms and my wallet. But there was a third path. "I can't give you a job at Hydroflow or Root and River, Keisha," I said, my voice even. "That wouldn't be fair to the people who've earned their place, and it would undermine everything Marcus and I are building." Her face collapsed. "But," I continued, "I know the manager of the Willow Creek Verdens, the venue. They're always looking for reliable staff for events, setup, breakdown, guest services. It's hard work, long hours. It doesn't pay a fortune, but it pays. I can put in a word. No special treatment. You'd be hired or not on your own merit." She stared at me, confusion warring with a dawning, humble understanding. I wasn't offering salvation. I was offering a shovel, a way to dig herself out. "Why?" she whispered. "Because, despite everything, you're my sister. And because real power isn't about watching people drown, it's about throwing a rope, even if you make them pull themselves to shore. Take it or leave it. She looked down at her hands, then back at me, a flicker of the old steel in her gaze, but tempered now by hardship. I'll take it. Thank you, Naya.
I called the manager. An hour later, Keisha left with a time and date for an interview. I watched her walk down the driveway in the rain, shoulders hunched but steps purposeful. It was a beginning, a hard, humble one. When Marcus came home that evening, I told him. He listened, then pulled me close. That was merciful and ruthless all at once. Perfect. He kissed my head. You amaze me. It felt right, I said, leaning into him. It felt like closure on my terms. Months flowed into a year. Root and River broke ground on 3 major projects. My family became a quiet, if not warm, presence on the periphery. Keisha got the job, kept it, and was promoted to event coordinator. She paid a small rent on a modest apartment she shared with our parents. My father, stripped of his professional identity, surprised everyone by volunteering with a legal aid group, offering counsel to those facing foreclosure. It was, Dante told me, the first time he'd ever seen the man look peaceful. My mother, slowly and painfully, began therapy. We didn't become one big happy family. The wounds were too deep for that. But a tense, distant detente settled. They were in my world now, navigating its realities, and I was no longer seeking entry to theirs. On our first wedding anniversary, Marcus and I returned to Willow Creek Gardens. It was autumn now, the willows trailing golden leaves. We stood under the same oak tree, just the 2 of us. A year ago, I stood here watching you walk toward me through a wall of silence, he said, his voice thick. It was the bravest thing I'd ever seen. A year ago, I walked toward the only person who ever saw me. It was the easiest choice I've ever made. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stuttered. Inside wasn't a new ring, but a delicate platinum necklace. Hanging from it was a tiny, exquisitely crafted pendant. On one side, a microscopic, perfect weld of 2 different metals. On the other, a single blooming orchid. The weld, he said, fastening it around my neck, is for how we fused our lives. The orchid is for the bouquet you held when you chose me, for the beautiful, resilient thing that grew in the neglected plot. I touched the pendant, warm against my skin. It was more precious than any diamond. It's perfect. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber, I thought of the empty chairs. They weren't a symbol of loss anymore. They were the necessary space that had allowed this, us, to grow wild and strong and true. The story wasn't about a plumber who was a king or an invisible daughter who became a queen. It was about 2 people who, in a world obsessed with surfaces, dared to dig deeper and found a love as essential and sustaining as water, as enduring as roots in rich, forgiving earth. Marcus took my hand, his thumb brushing over my wedding band. Ready to go home, Mrs. King? I looked at our joined hands, at the garden we were standing in, at the city lights beginning to sparkle beyond the trees, a city we were helping to heal, to green, to make whole. Yes, I smiled, the word full of a future I had designed myself. Let's go home. The peace that followed felt like a deep, nourishing rain after a decade of drought. The world buzzed around us, projects expanded, accolades came, media requests still piled up. But at the center of it all was a quiet, unshakable calm. Our home was no longer just a house, it was a sanctuary. Sunlight streamed into the studio where I worked on blueprints for a vertical farm that would climb the side of a low-income housing complex. The scent of fresh coffee and Marcus's worn-in leather chair in the study next door were the anchors of my day. My family's quiet, grinding journey through consequence continued. Dante became a more regular informant, his updates tinged with a kind of bewildered respect. Your dad, he told me over lunch one day, shaking his head, he's down at the legal aid clinic 3 days a week, actually listening to people. I heard him tell a single mother facing eviction, the system is built to intimidate.
Don't let it. I nearly choked on my sandwich. The image was so foreign it took a moment to compute. Desmond Vance, champion of the intimidated? It wasn't redemption, not by a long shot. It was perhaps survival, or maybe the first flicker of a conscience long buried under layers of ambition. My mother, Patrice, according to Dante, had taken up gardening. Not the orchid and crystal vase kind, like actual dirt. She's growing tomatoes on the balcony of their apartment. She killed the first 3 plants, cried over them, and started again. Keisha was thriving in her own stripped-down way. The event coordinator job suited her. She had an eye for detail and a newfound desperate work ethic. She'd called me once, just once, to thank me again, her voice free of its old performative drama. "It's honest," she said simply. "It feels honest." This fragile, distant equilibrium might have held indefinitely, a slow, quiet healing on separate paths. But the universe, it seemed, had one final lesson to impart, a test not of our strength, but our newfound peace. It was a crisp Thursday evening. Marcus was in Washington, D.C., finalizing details for the next phase of the federal infrastructure project. I was home, curled up with a book. Walter had retired for the night. The security system was state-of-the-art, a silent digital sentinel. So when the soft but persistent knock came at the front door, not the gate, my blood ran cold. No one got past the gate without clearance. Heart hammering, I peered through the discreet camera monitor by the door. The figure on the step, illuminated by the porch light, made my breath catch. It was my father. But not the Desmond Vance of marble foyers and silk smoking jackets. This man was hunched, his expensive overcoat looking too large on his frame. His face was drawn, etched with lines of a fatigue that went deeper than physical tiredness. In his arms, he held a bundle. My mother, Patrice, was limp, her head lolling against his shoulder, her skin a frightening ashen gray. He wasn't trying to break in. He was just standing there, holding her, a statue of utter despair. Every instinct, every bitter memory screamed at me to call security, to shut the blinds, to retreat. This was a trick, a manipulation, the ultimate guilt play. But the look on his face? It wasn't cunning, it was primal, terrified. I disarmed the interior alarm and opened the door, keeping the reinforced glass storm door locked. "What is this?" My voice was harder than I intended. His eyes, bloodshot and desperate, met mine. "Nia." Her name was a ragged plea. "It's your mother. She collapsed. I called an ambulance, but they said there's a multi-car pileup on the interstate. All units are rerouted. It could be 40 minutes, an hour." His voice broke. "She's not breathing right. I have nowhere else to go." I looked at my mother's lifeless form. This wasn't a performance. The blue tinge to her lips was real. This was a medical emergency. The war inside me lasted only a second. The woman I had become, the one Marcus believed in, would not let someone die on her doorstep out of spite. I unlocked the storm door. "Bring her in. Lay her on the sofa, now." He staggered inside, laying her gently on the large sectional. I was already on my phone, calling not 911, but a direct line to a concierge medical service Marcus had insisted we retain. "This is Nia King. I have a female, approximately 60, unconscious, labored breathing, cyanosis present. My address, send a team now." I knelt beside my mother, my professional calm, born from managing project crises, taking over. I checked her airway, felt for a pulse. It was thready and fast. My father hovered, a ghost of his former self, wringing his hands. "She was just watering her plants. She said she felt dizzy, and then—" "Has this happened before?" I asked, my tone clinical. "A few spells. Lightheadedness. She refused to see a doctor, said we couldn't afford the scrutiny." Shame colored his words. Their pride had extended to hiding illness. The medical team arrived in under 7 minutes. 2 paramedics and a doctor, efficient and silent. They took over, hooking her up to monitors, administering oxygen. The words they murmured to each other were snippets. BP dangerously low, probable pulmonary embolism, critical. They loaded her onto a gurney.
The lead doctor turned to me. "We're taking her to Emory University Hospital. She needs immediate intervention." My father moved to follow, then stopped, turning back to me. The arrogance, the coldness was utterly gone. In its place was a raw, vulnerable fear. "Nia, thank you. Words failed him. "Go," I said, my own emotions a tangled knot I couldn't unravel. "Be with her." He went, scrambling into the back of the medical vehicle with a helplessness that was painful to watch. I stood alone in the sudden, echoing silence of my foyer. The scent of their fear, of antiseptic, lingered. I looked at the sofa where my mother had lain, at the indent on the cushion. My legs gave way, and I sank into a chair. I called Marcus. His voice, warm and steady, came through the line. "Hey, you! Miss me already?" The dam broke. The clinical detachment evaporated, and the sobs came, racking and uncontrollable. I told him everything in fractured sentences. He listened, his own breath hitching when I described her condition. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice shifting into command mode. "The jet is fueled. I'll be there in 3 hours. Don't go to the hospital alone. Wait for me. And Nia?" "Yes?" "Whatever you decide to do next, I'm with you. Always." I waited for him, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the dark. The ghosts weren't just in my head tonight. They had literally fallen onto my doorstep. When Marcus arrived, smelling of cold night air and jet fuel, he folded me into his arms without a word. He didn't offer platitudes. He just held me until the shaking stopped. "Let's go," he said finally. We drove to Emory in the pre-dawn gloom. In the waiting room of the cardiac intensive care unit, we found my father. He looked 100 years old, shrunken into a plastic chair. Kesha was there too, her face pale, still in her work clothes from the evening shift. They both looked up as we entered. My father's eyes widened at the sight of Marcus, not with hostility, but with something like awe and profound, gut-wrenching shame. "The doctors, they said it was a massive blood clot in her lung," Kesha whispered, her voice trembling. "They did a procedure. She's in a medically induced coma. It's touch and go." We sat, the 4 of us, in a silent, surreal row. The rivalry, the bitterness, the millions of dollars and social points that once stood between us were meaningless now. All that existed was the rhythmic beep of a monitor from a nearby room and the shared, awful vigil. Hours ticked by. A doctor emerged looking weary. "Family of Patrice Vance?" We all stood. "I'm her daughter," I said, and for the first time, the word didn't taste like ashes. "The procedure was successful. We've stabilized her. The next 24 hours are crucial, but she's a fighter. You can see her, one at a time, for a few minutes." My father looked at me, then at Marcus, then back to me. He nodded, gesturing for me to go first. It was a small, monumental surrender. The ICU room was a forest of wires and blinking lights. My mother looked small and impossibly fragile amidst it all, a far cry from the imposing woman in sequin gowns. I stood by the bed, watching the slow, mechanical rise and fall of her chest. "I don't know if you can hear me," I whispered, my hand hovering over hers, before finally, gently, resting on it. Her skin was cool. "You need to fight. Your tomatoes need you, and, oddly enough, so do I." The admission shocked me as it left my lips. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was a simple, stark truth. The thought of her simply ceasing to exist, with all our ugly history unresolved, felt like a door slamming shut, leaving a draft of unfinished business. In the waiting room, a shift occurred. Marcus went and got coffee for everyone. He handed a cup to my father. Desmond Vance took it, his hands shaking so badly the liquid sloshed. "Thank you," he mumbled, not meeting Marcus's eyes. "For her." Marcus simply nodded. "She's Nia's mother." It was a fact, not an absolution. Over the next 2 days, as my mother slowly, miraculously, clawed her way back to consciousness, a new and fragile dynamic was forged in the crucible of that hospital. We weren't a family mending. We were survivors of the same emotional shipwreck, washed up on the same barren shore, forced to share the same meager fire. When my mother finally opened her eyes, bleary and confused, I was there with Kesha. Her gaze drifted over the tubes, the room, and landed on me. A tear leaked from the corner of her eye. She couldn't speak, but her fingers twitched. I took her hand again. "Don't try to talk," I said, my voice soft. "Just rest." A week later, she was moved to a regular room. The financial tidal wave of her medical bills was looming, a reality my father could no longer ignore. He looked defeated, the last vestiges of his pride crumbling. It was Marcus who quietly stepped in, not with a grand, forgiving check, but with a solution that allowed dignity. He spoke to my father alone in the hospital cafeteria. I learned later what was said. "Desmond, no, Mr. Vance, no false deference. Nia won't let her mother go without care, but writing a check solves nothing for you. I have a proposal. My legal team is overwhelmed with the contractual side of the federal project. It's detail work, complex but not glamorous. I need a contract review specialist on a temporary consulting basis. The pay is fair. It would cover her bills. It's work, not charity. Take it or leave it." My father, who had once refused to shake the hand of a plumber, stared at the man who was now offering him a lifeline, couched in respect for his remaining skill. He took the job. Life settled into a new, profoundly strange rhythm. My mother recovered, physically at least. The experience had hollowed her out, leaving behind a quieter, less certain woman. She and my father lived in their small apartment. He worked his consulting job remotely. She tended her tomatoes, and I learned through Keisha, had started volunteering once a week at a community garden I had designed. The past was not forgotten, the wounds were not magically healed, but they were no longer bleeding openly. We existed in a state of careful, mutual non-aggression, punctuated by occasional, stilted family dinners that Marcus and I hosted. The conversations were awkward, often centering on safe topics like the weather or Keisha's work, but no one hurled insults. No one walked out. One evening, after such a dinner, as my parents and Keisha were leaving, my mother paused at the door. She turned to me, her eyes searching my face. She reached out, hesitated, and then placed a small, warm object in my hand. It was a perfectly ripe, deep red tomato from her balcony plant. "Thank you, Nia," she said, her voice still weak but clear, "for the soil." It was a cryptic, imperfect apology, but it was real. It was an offering from her new, humble world to mine. I accepted it. Later, as Marcus and I cleaned up, he wrapped his arms around me from behind, looking over my shoulder at the tomato sitting on our counter. "From ruin, a harvest," he mused softly. "It's not a harvest," I said, leaning back into his strength. "It's just a seed. What grows from it? We'll see." He turned me to face him, his eyes serious. "You know, when I bought that black card, when I built the company, I thought power was about never being vulnerable, about building walls so high no one could ever look down on me again." He brushed a strand of hair from my face. "But you taught me that real power is having walls so strong you can afford to leave the gate unlocked. That it's not about never needing anyone, it's about choosing who you need and who needs you." I looked around our home, filled with light and plants and blueprints of a better future. I thought of the sister finding her strength in honest work, the father rediscovering purpose and service, the mother learning to nurture life in a pot of dirt. And I thought of the man beside me, who had loved me through invisibility and into my own spotlight. The story wasn't about a fairy tale ending where everyone hugs and all is forgiven. It was messier, more human than that. It was about fractures that don't fully fuse, but with time and care can bear weight again. It was building a new kingdom not on the scorched earth of the old one, but beside it, with better foundations, where the only entry requirement was a willing heart. And as Marcus kissed me, under the soft light of our kitchen with a homegrown tomato on the counter between us and a city of green, growing projects waiting for the dawn, I knew with absolute certainty that our story, the real one, was just beginning. It was a story not of revenge, but of residence. And it was more than enough. Years are not the clean, linear things we imagine. They are messy, layered, like soil in a thriving garden. Compost and clay, rain and roots, death and rebirth all mingled into something fertile. 5 such years passed. The Root and River Initiative was no longer an initiative, it was the soul of Hydroflow. Our projects dotted the country, turning concrete monoliths into living, breathing ecosystems. The Willow Creek Water Hub, my first, had become a beloved community landmark, its rooftop farm providing fresh produce for the surrounding neighborhood. I'd won awards, given TED Talks, been called a visionary. The title that mattered most, however, was the one I heard whispered by the volunteers at our urban gardens. That's Nia King. She gets her hands dirty. Marcus's empire had solidified, but his focus had shifted. The thrill was no longer in the acquisition, but in the application. He'd become a quiet, powerful force in ethical tech investment, funding startups that prioritized people over profit margins. The man who once hid his wealth now used its glare as a spotlight, illuminating causes that mattered. Our home remained a sanctuary. It was often full. Colleagues brainstorming over takeout, friends laughing in the garden, community organizers plotting their next move. The ghosts of the past didn't haunt these halls. They'd been invited in, disarmed, and given a cup of tea. My parents' transformation was a slow, organic process, like the weathering of stone. My father, Desmond, completed his consulting contract with Hydroflow. The work had been a lifeline, but also a lesson. He didn't return to corporate law. Instead, he used his severance to partner with a nonprofit, providing pro bono legal counsel to minority-owned small businesses, navigating government contracts. He was good at it. He found in the gritty details of helping a family-run grocery store secure a loan or a daycare center meet safety codes a satisfaction that eluded him in the marble halls of his old firm. He and Marcus had developed a grudging, respectful rapport, discussing regulatory hurdles over chess games in our study. Checkmate was often delivered with a wise smile, not a sneer. My mother, Patrice, had become the unexpected matriarch of a network of community gardens. Her balcony tomatoes were just the beginning. She'd taken the knowledge she'd gleaned from my designs and her own stubborn research and become a fierce advocate for urban agriculture. She organized seed swaps, taught composting workshops to skeptical retirees, and could be found most Saturdays kneeling in the dirt of a local plot, her designer hands, now permanently stained with earth, deftly thinning carrot seedlings. The society pages that once chronicled her gowns now occasionally featured a photo of her smiling broadly, face smudged, holding a giant zucchini. She called me sometimes, not for drama, but for advice. Nia, the aphids are back on the kale. Is that neem oil mixture still the one you recommend? Keisha had climbed her own ladder. From event coordinator, she'd become the manager of a boutique sustainable event planning company. She specialized in zero-waste weddings, a poetic full circle that made me smile. She'd even met someone, a quiet, solid graphic designer named Leo, who loved her sharp mind and had no interest in her faded family name. They were getting married next spring, in, of course, a green ceremony. She'd asked me, tentatively, to be her maiden of honor. I said yes. This was the landscape of our lives. Not perfect, but profoundly real. We thought the storms were past. We were wrong. The new tempest arrived in the form of a sleek, white envelope hand-delivered to our gate. It was addressed to Marcus in a sharp, familiar script. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper. Mr. King, a matter of some urgency requires your attention. It pertains to a legacy that predates our disagreements. I would be grateful for a discreet meeting at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Alastair Braddock IV. Braddock. The name was a cannonball through the porthole of our peace. Alastair Braddock III had been Brad's grandfather, the banking patriarch whose library at Yale my mother had once worshipped. Brad's fraud had not only destroyed his own life, but had severely tarnished, if not bankrupted, the venerable Braddock name. Marcus showed me the note, his expression grim. "The sins of the pseudo-fiancé," he muttered. "I thought we were done with this." What could he possibly want? I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Nothing good, Marcus said, but ignoring a Braddock, even a diminished one, is rarely wise. They have a way of making nuisances of themselves from the shadows. The meeting was set at a neutral private club in the city. Marcus insisted I come. Whatever this is, it involves the past. Our past. You have a right to face it. Alastair Braddock IV was a man in his 70s, with the desiccated elegance of a preserved orchid. He wore his loss of fortune like a threadbare but impeccably tailored suit. He didn't offer his hand. Mr. King, Mrs. King, he acknowledged, his voice dry as parchment. Thank you for coming. I will be brief. My grandson's indiscretions were a tragedy. However, in his frantic attempts to cover his tracks, he engaged in one piece of legitimate business, a joint venture signed a month before his arrest with a shell company we have since traced back to your father-in-law, Desmond Vance. The air left the room. My father? I breathed. Braddock slid a photocopied contract across the polished table. It was dense with legalese, but the crux was clear. A speculative land development deal near the ever-expanding Atlanta Beltline. Brad had put in fraudulent funds from his scheme. My father, desperate to recoup some of his stolen money and too proud to declare bankruptcy, had signed over what was left of the Vance family trust as collateral, a trust that, unbeknownst to Brad, included a long-forgotten parcel of land deeded to my mother's side of the family, a parcel they'd never bothered to develop. The venture is defunct, but the collateral remains legally entangled. My family's creditors are aggressive. They are coming for every asset with a Braddock fingerprint, including this one. They will seize and liquidate that land to settle debts. Unless, he paused, a more powerful entity intervenes and assumes the obligation, cleansing the title. He was looking directly at Marcus. This wasn't a social call. It was a shakedown, a graceful, polite, utterly ruthless one. He was offering Marcus a choice. Let my parents' last asset of meaning be publicly auctioned off in a scandalous fire sale, dragging the Vance name, and, by association, the King name, through yet another round of humiliating mud, or buy the debt. Save them. Again. You're asking me to bail out a bad deal made by a criminal and a desperate man, Marcus stated, his voice dangerously calm. I am presenting you with a logistical problem that affects your family's public standing, Brad corrected. The solution is a simple financial transaction, a purchase of debt. The land, I'm told, is quite worthless, a swampy patch on the south side. Consider it the cost of keeping your narrative tidy. Rage, hot and clean, washed over me. This was the old world reaching out from its grave, its bony fingers trying to snatch at our heels. It wanted to pull us back into the muck of shame and obligation. Marcus leaned back, steepling his fingers. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. This wasn't his decision alone. This was about my family, my history. I thought of my father, finally finding peace and helping others, of my mother, her hands in the soil, building something from nothing, of the fragile, hard-won peace we all nurtured. This scandal would crush them. It would be the final, ironic twist, destroyed not by their own original sin, but by their son-in-law's refusal to pay a villain's toll. But to pay was to surrender to the old rules, to be manipulated by the ghosts of Wall Street. We need the night, I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. Braddock inclined his head, a faint smile playing on his thin lips. He believed he had us cornered. In the car, I was shaking. He's a vulture. He's using their last shred of dignity as leverage against you. Marcus was silent, driving with a focused intensity. After several blocks, he spoke. He's right about one thing. It's a logistical problem. And I don't solve problems by reacting. I solve them by engineering a better outcome. He didn't go home. He drove to Hydroflow headquarters, to the quiet, tech-veiled sanctum of his R&D lab. For 2 hours, he pored over satellite maps, geological surveys, and municipal planning documents for that worthless swampy patch on the south side. I sat with him, watching as his eyes, the eyes that once saw the solution in a broken pipe, scanned the data. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. "It's not worthless," he said, tapping the screen. "It's a gold mine. It's the perfect catchment basin. The city's new sustainability plan, the one we helped draft, has identified the south side as a critical zone for managing stormwater runoff and expanding green space. This swamp is a natural sponge. The city needs it. They just don't know it yet." The plan unfolded in his mind, and he laid it out for me. We wouldn't just buy the debt from the Braddock's creditors. We would buy the land outright through a third-party trust, cutting the Braddocks completely out. Then, we would donate the land to the city under the condition it become the Vance King Wetland and Community Water Park, a root and river flagship project. The city would get a vital piece of infrastructure for a fraction of its value. The scandalous collateral would be transformed into a public legacy. My parents' name would be attached to a gift, not a disgrace. It was brilliant. It was a move that didn't just defeat the old world's game, it changed the game entirely. The next morning, we met Braddock not at his club, but in the office of the city's head of urban planning with a deputy mayor present. Marcus laid out the proposal, not as a desperate rescue, but as a civic partnership. He presented the hydrological studies, the projected benefits, the design sketches I'd hastily drawn overnight of boardwalks through wetlands, community gardens on the reclaimed edges, an educational center. Braddock was stunned as the city officials buzzed with excitement. His leverage had evaporated. His choice was now to accept a fair market price for the debt from a neutral trust, funded by Marcus, and walk away with some scrap of dignity, or fight a public, losing battle against a popular civic donation. He took the buyout, his face ashen with the realization that he had been outmaneuvered on every level. Afterwards, Marcus and I stood on the proposed site. It was muddy, overgrown, buzzing with insects. It was beautiful. "We'll need to tell them," I said, meaning my parents. "We will," he agreed, "but not as a rescue, as a partnership. They have a stake in this too. Your mother's community garden network can help run the educational programs. Your father's legal nonprofit can handle the community outreach contracts. It's their land. It should be their legacy, too." We gathered them that evening, my parents, Keisha, Leo. In our living room, Marcus explained everything. Braddock's threat, the land's true value, our solution. He presented it not as, "we saved you," but as, "we have an incredible opportunity." My father listened, his face a tapestry of emotions. Shock, shame at his old folly, then dawning awe. When Marcus finished, my father stood, walked to the window, and was silent for a long time. He turned, his eyes glistening. "All my life," he said, his voice rough, "I chased a legacy of stone and steel, something heavy and permanent to leave behind. I built a monument to my own ego, and it turned to sand." He looked at Marcus, then at me. "You two. You take a forgotten swamp and see a garden. You take a debt and see a gift. That," he shook his head, a true, unguarded smile breaking through, "that is a legacy." My mother reached over and took my hand, her earth-stained fingers gripping mine tightly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The Vance King Wetland Preserve broke ground 6 months later. The press covered it as a feel-good story of family and environmentalism. The old scandals were a distant footnote. At the ceremony, my father spoke, not as a disgraced patriarch, but as a community advocate. My mother cut the ribbon, her smile radiant and genuine. As the shovels turned the earth, Marcus leaned close to me, his voice for my ears only. "You know, when I met you, I thought I was saving you from a gilded cage." I looked at our families mingling with city officials and neighborhood children, at the muddy, promising ground, at the future unfolding in front of us.
Turns out, I whispered back, squeezing his hand, we were saving each other for this. The sun was high, the future was wet and fertile and bright, and the story, our messy, glorious human story, kept growing, wild and deep and green, forever reaching for the light.